Would you marry me? I'm not joking. Well, maybe just a little. The words drifted out of Maya's mouth with a strange mix of playfulness and sincerity, like she'd tossed them into the air just to see where they'd land. Jerome Carter, 32, was halfway through driving a nail into a crooked fence post when her voice caught him off guard. He didn't turn right away. His hand paused mid-strike, fingers tightening unconsciously around the hammer. The sound of birdsong and the creak of summer heat pressing against the wood filled the silence that followed. It wasn't the southern sun that made his chest tighten, it was that question, hanging there like the last thread in a fragile net. When Jerome finally did turn, it wasn't fast. He wasn't sure what expression he expected to find. A grin? Raised eyebrows? That teasing half-smile people wear when they're poking fun just to see you flinch. But Maya Williams stood still on the porch steps, barefoot on the faded planks, a tall glass of lemonade in one hand and a damp dish towel looped around the other. Her silk dress, soft and dove-gray, clung gently to her frame in the summer air. Her hair, wild and sunlit, curled around her shoulders like it had forgotten to behave, and her face open, watchful, held no trace of laughter, but not quite solemnity either. You serious?" Jerome asked, narrowing his eyes. She lifted a shoulder, almost too casually. "Serious-ish." He blinked. "That a real word?" "It is when I use it." Her lips curled just slightly, not quite a smile, but something close. "It's not a proposal, Jerome. It's a question. A curiosity." He straightened slowly, letting the hammer hang loose in his grip. "You always hit folks with lifelong hypotheticals before they finish fixing your fence? Only when they're quiet, thoughtful, and look like they've been carrying something heavy for a long time." Jerome exhaled, but it wasn't a laugh. More like a release of breath that had been waiting for an exit all day. For 3 days now, he'd worked around Maya's property-fixing hinges, hauling debris, trying not to notice the way she watched the world like she was waiting for it to surprise her. And now this. A question half in jest, half rooted in something far more complicated. "You're not just making conversation?" he asked, voice low. She stepped down a rung, bringing herself closer to eye level with him. "I mean, maybe I am. Maybe I'm just tired of pretending I don't think about it." There was something in her Tonian undercurrent he recognized. Loneliness wrapped in bravado. Hope wearing sarcasm like armor. Jerome glanced at the crooked fence, then back at her. "Depends." She raised an eyebrow. "On? If she makes lemonade like this." That time the smile broke through. Unforced, soft. Her laugh followed, loose and real, like a screen door swinging open after years of rust. "Not store-bought," she said, holding up the glass. "I squeeze my own." "Of course you do," he muttered, more to himself than her. They stayed like that for a while, him leaning slightly on the splintered rail, her swaying a little in the late-day breeze. Nothing urgent, nothing defined, just the strange peace of two people pausing in the middle of something unfinished. "You ever wonder," Maya said quietly, "if some people were meant to stumble into your life at just the right time, even if it's just for a little while?" Jerome didn't answer, but his silence said plenty. That night, back in his small apartment above his uncle's garage, Jerome ignored 3 missed calls from his mom. She was probably going to tell him the raccoons were back again, or that her neighbor's dog was possessed. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the condensation running down the side of a plastic cup and replaying that voice in his head. "Would you marry me? I'm not joking." "Well, maybe just a little." He smiled, despite himself. It was supposed to be just a job, a fence, a couple of loose boards, but somehow, it felt like something else had started to come together, something that couldn't be measured in nails or lumber, something soft and a little bit dangerous. The next morning, Jerome arrived earlier than usual, not because the job demanded it, but because he hadn't stopped thinking about Maya's question all night. He told himself it was the heat, or the noise from the garage downstairs, or the fact that he'd skipped dinner, but the truth was heavier than that. It had nothing to do with fences. It had everything to do with the way she'd looked at him when she asked. As he pulled into her driveway, he saw her crouched in the garden near the lemon tree, still small, still defiant against the dry earth. She was wearing denim overalls this time, her curls tied up in a loose knot that somehow made her seem even younger. A small speaker played Ella Fitzgerald softly from the windowsill. Next to her, a sprinkler spun lazily in the air, soaking her arm as she reached into the soil. She looked up and smiled. "You're early." Jerome climbed out of the truck, brushing crumbs off his t-shirt. Didn't want to waste the cool hours. Fence posts gotta set before the sun cooks it. "Or maybe," she said, standing, "you wanted to see if I'd ask you to marry me again." He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "Depends on if there's mint tea involved." She disappeared into the house and re-emerged with 2 mason jars of cold mint tea, condensation clinging to the sides. "You strike me as a man who doesn't like sugar in his tea." Jerome took a sip. "I like the kind that doesn't come with conditions." Maya grinned, then nodded toward the fence. "Go on, then. Make that thing stand proud." He walked to the side yard and began where he left off, pulling new boards from the back of the truck. From the corner of his eye, he saw her sitting on the porch swing, legs tucked beneath her, a notebook in her lap. Occasionally she'd hum along to the music, sometimes just stare out into nothing. By mid-morning, the sun started to press down harder. Jerome peeled off his work shirt, revealing a plain white tee beneath, damp from the effort. Maya brought out a fan and placed it by the porch rail, plugging it into a long extension cord. "I feel guilty just sitting here," she said. "You've earned it," Jerome replied. "Single mom, full-time worker, emotional philosopher, your resume full. Don't forget tea alchemist." "That too," he said with a smile. Suddenly, a sharp chirp came from her phone. Maya glanced at it and groaned. "My babysitter canceled, which means I have exactly 40 minutes to figure out who's going to keep my 6-year-old from eating toothpaste while I'm at the library tonight." "You work at the library?" 3 nights a week. Not glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me an excuse to hoard used books." "Sounds like a good excuse to me." She sighed and leaned against the porch column. "Do you ever feel like you're holding too many pieces together with one hand, hoping nobody notices you're out of glue?" Jerome nodded. "All the time, especially when the glue is a borrowed wrench and a $20 socket set." Maya tilted her head, considering him. "You talk like a man who's lived 3 lives already." "Maybe I have," he said quietly, returning his focus to the fence. They didn't speak again for a while. The hammering filled the space between them, steady and comforting. Every so often, he'd catch her watching him, nothing intense, just curious, like she was trying to read a book with half the pages torn out. Near noon, the sky thickened with clouds and the smell of hot rain. Maya stood, stretched, and said, "I should make lunch." You don't have to," Jerome said, wiping his hands on a towel. "I brought some leftover chicken and cornbread." "Leftover? Homemade?" "My mom's, and she's territorial. Don't tell her I gave it away." Maya raised an eyebrow. "I'm intrigued. Come inside. I'll swap you for a tomato sandwich." Inside, the house was cooler than he expected, shaded by wide curtains and the occasional slow-turning ceiling fan. It smelled like lemon peel, wood polish, and something faintly floral. He followed her into the kitchen, where a stack of books sat beside the sink and a drawing of a smiling sun hung on the fridge. "That yours?" he asked, pointing at the picture. "No," she said with mock seriousness. "It's my roommate's. He's 6, also into trucks and making sure the peanut butter touches both sides of the bread. I like him already." As they sat at the kitchen table, Maya poured sweet tea into chipped mugs and passed him a sandwich. Jerome placed the Tupperware container of chicken between them. They ate quietly at first, the silence not uncomfortable but thoughtful. If you've ever shared a quiet moment with someone that said more than words ever could, tap like to let Maya know she's not alone. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Who knows? Someone nearby might be watching too. Finally, Maya set down her sandwich and asked, "What happened to your dream?" Jerome looked up, surprised. "You mentioned once you wanted to build your own house. Porch, dog, rocking chair. What stopped you?" He hesitated. "Life. Bills. A woman who didn't believe a man with calloused hands and big ideas could also be stable." "She told you that?" "She didn't have to." Maya looked at him then, not through him, not past him, but right at him. "Well, for the record, I like calloused hands and big ideas." He looked away, trying to smile. "That a proposal?" She leaned back in her chair, sipping her tea. "Just a curiosity." Jerome laughed then, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than amusement. She laughed with him, and for a few seconds, the sound filled the house like light. Later, as he packed up his tools, Maya walked him to the truck. "Thanks for lunch," he said, hoisting the toolbox into the bed. "Thanks for not running away after yesterday's question." He paused, leaning against the door, still thinking about it. Maya crossed her arms, not teasing this time. "Good. I meant it, even if I said it like I didn't." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I figured that out last night." She smiled, and for a moment, Jerome thought about what his mother would say if he brought home a woman who wore silk dresses barefoot and made lemonade like it was a language. As he turned to leave, Maya called out, "Jerome?" He glanced back. "I hope you fix more than fences." He didn't answer, just gave a slight nod, started the engine, and pulled away, carrying with him the ghost of a question that wouldn't go away. Not yet, not ever. Jerome returned on Saturday morning. The air was thick with late summer humidity, the kind that made your shirt stick to your back before noon. As he stepped out of the truck, toolbox in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other, something felt off. Maya wasn't on the porch like she usually was. The swing sat still. No music floated from the windows. The front door was closed, blinds drawn. He paused, one foot on the first step, uncertain if he should knock or wait. Then he noticed it. An envelope, beige and weathered, sticking awkwardly out of the mailbox. It didn't have a stamp, no return address, just her name, Maya Williams, typed in capital letters. Jerome felt his chest tighten. He pulled it out gently, looked around the quiet street, then knocked twice on the door. It opened slowly. Maya stood there in a t-shirt and loose flannel pajama pants, her hair a mess, eyes puffy like she hadn't slept. She blinked at him. "You okay?" he asked, holding up the envelope. "Found this." Her gaze dropped. She didn't move for a moment. Then she stepped aside wordlessly, letting him in. The living room was dim, blinds pulled tight. Toys were scattered across the floor, plastic dinosaurs, crayons, a half-built Lego city on the coffee table. Her son must have still been asleep. Jerome sat down on the edge of the couch, the envelope still in his hand. "Want me to open it?" he asked softly. She nodded. He peeled it open carefully, like something inside might break. There was one paginatyped, unsigned. "Some people forget how things used to be. Neighbors notice. Watch your step." That was it. Jerome read it twice, then folded it slowly. His jaw tightened. "Who would send this?" he asked. Maya sank into the armchair across from him, pulling her knees to her chest. "I don't know. But it was in the box this morning. I went out to water the lemon tree and saw it." Jerome looked toward the window. "This neighborhood always this nosy? It's a town that likes its own kind," she said flatly. "Single mothers, black men in white neighborhoods. People notice." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You think it's about me?" "It's not just about you," she said. "It's about what people assume when they see you and me, and maybe a little boy with curly hair who looks like no one else on this street." Silence stretched between them, heavier than before. Outside, a lawnmower started up down the block. A dog barked somewhere behind the fence. Life went on blind to the weight pressing into their lungs. "I can talk to someone," Jerome offered. "I've got a cousin in city council. Maybe it's a pattern." Maya shook her head. "No proof, no signature, just enough to make me second-guess everything." Jerome stood, pacing slowly. "It's meant to scare you." She looked up. "It worked." He stopped. "Then we scare back." Maya tilted her head. "How?" "By not going anywhere. By finishing this fence. By playing music too loud and letting your boy draw sidewalk chalk all the way down the driveway." Her mouth quirked up, tired but genuine. "That'll show them." He walked over and crouched beside her. "You told me to fix more than fences. Maybe this is part of it." She looked into his eyes for a long time. Then she nodded. Later that morning, Jerome was back out front, sleeves rolled up, laying down the final boards along the west side. Each hammer stroke echoed sharper than usual. Each nail felt like a stake driven into the earth, a small declaration that they weren't going anywhere. Maya came out an hour later, dressed now in jeans and a pale yellow blouse, hair tied back. She carried 2 cups of mint tea and handed one to him without a word. They stood together, looking at the nearly finished fence. "It's stronger than it looks," he said. "So am I," she replied quietly. Just then, from across the street, An elderly woman in a floral housecoat appeared on her porch with binoculars in hand. Maya gave a dry laugh. That's Mrs. Prentice. She thinks I'm harboring gang members and unlicensed succulents. Jerome smirked. Should I wave? Please do. And he lifted his hand in a slow, exaggerated wave. Mrs. Prentice lowered the binoculars just slightly, then turned and disappeared back inside. That's progress, Maya said. Later that afternoon, her son came outside a wiry little 6-year-old named Elijah, with an oversized Marvel t-shirt and juice-stained lips. Who's that? He asked, pointing at Jerome. That's Mr. Jerome. He's helping fix our fence. Elijah squinted. Why's he sweating so much? Because it's hard work, Maya said, tousling his hair. Jerome knelt down. Hey there, want to help me hold the tape measure? The boy beamed and nodded. For the next hour, they worked side by side, Elijah holding the end of the tape, Maya handing Jerome nails, and Jerome showing Elijah how to mark lines in pencil. The rhythm returned, light and simple. And then, somewhere in the calm, Jerome glanced up and saw Maya watching him. This time, she didn't look away. She didn't smile. She just watched. Like she'd been waiting for someone to look back and see her the way she saw herself. He cleared his throat. You want this thing to hold up for 10 years or 20? She stepped closer. Make it 30. That night, Jerome sat on the edge of his bed, phone pressed to his ear. You still hearing things under the trailer, Mama? No, his mother said, sounding distracted. But I did dream last night that you married a woman in a yellow dress and built her a house with a porch swing. Jerome blinked. You what? I'm just saying, she replied. Sometimes God whispers, sometimes he shouts. He didn't know what to say to that. As he hung up and turned out the light, he thought again about the envelope, the fence, the little boy, the tea, and the way Maya's eyes didn't flinch even when the world pushed hard against her. There was more to fix here than wood, and he wasn't going anywhere. It happened sometime after midnight. Maya was the first to notice. She'd gone out early, still in her robe, mug of black coffee in hand, to check on the garden. Jerome had finished the fence the day before, and she was planning to plant some lavender under the freshly set post near the corner. She never made it that far. The scream was sharp enough to pull Jerome out of half-sleep and straight into his boots. He crossed the street in seconds, his heart pounding harder than his footsteps on the pavement. She was standing barefoot on the grass, both hands clamped over her mouth. Her mug lay shattered nearby, black coffee soaking into the dirt. At her feet, the lemon tree small but defiant, just beginning to boudoir gone. All that remained was a jagged stump, clean cut, splinters splayed like raw bone. He didn't ask what happened. The sawdust told its own story. Didn't hear anything, Maya said, voice tight, eyes fixed on the stump. I was right here last night, porch light on. Jerome stepped in, gently touching her elbow. It happened late, after the lights went out. She shook her head slowly. They cut it, like it was nothing, like it didn't matter. He bent down, ran his hand along the wood. Fresh. Maybe 2 hours ago. This was Elijah's favorite thing to check every morning, she whispered. He'd count the leaves. Said when it made fruit, we'd make lemon ice pops. Jerome didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't feel hollow. Later that morning, after Elijah was at a friend's house and the yard had fallen quiet again, Maya sat on the porch steps, arms wrapped around her knees. Jerome brought her a towel-wrapped ice pack and a strong cup of coffee with too much sugar, just the way she liked it when she was upset. I know it's just a tree, she said. It wasn't. She nodded, eyes distant. Richard hated lemons, said they were bitter. But when I left him, the first thing I did was plant that damn tree. Took 3 years to grow roots, 2 years to sprout anything. Then last week, it finally gave me one bloom. Just one. I felt like it was a sign. You know? Like maybe I was allowed to start again. Jerome crouched beside her. You still are. They're telling me I'm not wanted here, she said. The letter, the stairs, now this. They're not subtle. They're also cowards. They hide behind bushes and mailboxes and chainsaws at night. Maya's laugh was hollow. Do you know how much it hurts to have to convince yourself you belong on your own front lawn? Jerome's eyes darkened. Yeah, he said. I know that one too well. She turned toward him. Why does it make people so angry? A black man helping a white woman? Fixing a fence? Drinking tea on her porch? Because it doesn't fit their picture, Jerome said. And when people can't understand something, they try to control it, or cut it down. She looked at him a long moment, then reached into the pocket of her robe and handed him a small piece of folded paper. I found this under the doormat. He opened it. Another typed message. Pretty little trees don't belong in this dirt. Neither do you. Jerome folded the note with care, as if the words themselves could burn if handled too roughly. That's it, he said. I'm calling someone. Who? The HOA. They won't lift a finger unless the sidewalk cracks. I'll go higher. Councilman or not, somebody needs to know what's happening here. Maya leaned back against the porch railing, rubbing her temples. It's not about catching anyone anymore. It's about letting them know I'm not leaving. Jerome stood. Then, let's make it loud. That afternoon, they went to the local nursery. Maya picked out another lemon tree, this one slightly taller, with small green bulbs already forming. Jerome loaded it into the truck with a quiet reverence, his hands more careful than usual. Do you think it's stupid? Maya asked, watching the young tree sway slightly in the wind. No, Jerome said. I think it's defiant. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the neighbors' hedges, they planted the new tree together. Maya dug the hole. Jerome held the roots. Elijah came outside with a plastic watering can and declared, "This one's going to be twice as strong." Maya smiled, brushing dirt from her knees. Let's hope. Before they went inside, Jerome hammered a small wooden stake into the ground next to the sapling. On it, he wrote in black marker, "Still here." The next morning, Maya woke to find a basket on her porch. No note. Inside, a single lemon, a crossword puzzle book, and a ribbon of pink satin tied in a bow. She stared at it for a long time. Later, when Jerome arrived, she showed it to him without a word. He examined the items carefully. The lemon's real, he said. Organic. Fresh cut. The crosswords already filled in, she added. He flipped through it. All the answers are flower names. Garden, related, forgiveness, bloom, persevere. So, an apology? Or someone trying to look like they're sorry? They sat in silence for a moment, the early sun warming their feet on the porch steps. You know what bothers me? Maya said finally. Not the note, not the cut tree, not even the lemon. It's the fact that I don't know if I'm supposed to feel afraid or pitied. Jerome took a sip of his coffee. Then don't feel either. What should I feel? He looked at her, voice even. Determined. She nodded slowly, then looked at the lemon in her hand. Elijah wants to make lemonade tonight. I'll bring the sugar, Jerome said. And maybe we add a little mint. Bitterness goes better when it's shared. That night, as they sipped homemade lemonade on the porch, Maya glanced at the young tree planted in fresh soil. It won't grow overnight, she said. Jerome replied, neither does trust. And beside them, Elijah scribbled on the sidewalk with blue chalk, spelling out a message of his own. Home. It rained 2 days later, a soft, persistent drizzle that coated the town in silver and soaked the corners of Maya's porch cushions. Jerome arrived just after lunch, raincoat dripping, boots caked in mud. He carried a small cardboard box under one arm and a grim expression he didn't bother to hide. Maya opened the door before he knocked. She'd been expecting him. The lemon tree in the yard looked both revived and exhausted, like it too had stayed up all night worrying. What's in the box? She asked, stepping aside. Jerome held it up. Something you're probably not going to like. Ugh. She led him inside, where Elijah was asleep on the couch, curled under a Spider-Man blanket, mouth slightly open. They moved quietly to the kitchen. He set the box down on the table. Maya raised an eyebrow. He pulled out a stack of old manila folders, some loose paperwork, a few photocopied forms. I didn't want to go digging, he said. But after what happened to the tree, and then the lemon basket, something didn't sit right. So I asked a friend in records to look into the deed history of your property. Maya froze. Why? He hesitated. Because sometimes people leave things behind. Things you never knew they touched. She took a step back. Jerome, what did you find? He slid one folder across the table, open to a scan of a mortgage form. Her name was on the top. But there, 2/3 down, was a signature line she didn't recognize. Richard took out a secondary mortgage 6 months before he died, Jerome said. Didn't tell you. That signature there, Lillian Harris. Co-signer. Maya stared at the name like it was a foreign language. That's not a banker's name. Number. It's not. My contact said the money didn't go to the house. It was transferred to a private account. Untraceable now, but it wasn't for renovations. She sat slowly, her hands flat on the table. He co-signed with another woman? Jerome lowered his eyes. It looks that way. Silence pooled in the kitchen like water on tile. I don't understand, she whispered. We were already falling apart. He was bitter, cold. But I thought I had the house, that if nothing else, this place was mine. It still is, Jerome said gently. Number, no, it's not. It's built on secrets, on money that wasn't ours. I didn't just lose a tree, Jerome. I lost the idea that I knew the man I buried. Jerome reached across the table, but she pulled away. I need a minute, she said. Please. He nodded and left without a word, the box still sitting on the table like a weight that couldn't be moved yet. That night, Maya stood in the kitchen long after Elijah had gone to bed. She held the mortgage form like it might answer her questions if she looked long enough. The kitchen light flickered. The clock ticked too loud. Outside, the lemon tree stood in the rain, unbothered by any of it. She picked up her phone and called Florence, the retired music teacher who lived 2 streets over, and made a point of inserting herself into other people's problems with unapologetic passion. Do you believe in burning things? Maya asked. There was a pause. You mean symbolically or with accelerant? I'm serious. So am I. The next afternoon, Florence arrived with Tupperware full of divorce soup, a spicy lentil recipe she swore could purge memories, and a Ziploc bag filled with tea candles. She set them on the kitchen counter like a battle kit. Jerome came by just before sunset. He found Maya in the backyard, wearing gardening gloves, holding a box of Richard's old journals and receipts. She didn't look up as he approached. I'm not doing this to be petty, she said. I just want it out of me. All of it. I understand. You don't have to stay. I know, he said. And he stayed anyway. They built a small fire pit in the corner of the yard, away from the lemon tree. Florence lit the first page. Maya dropped in a letter she'd once written but never mailed. Jerome added a photo of an unfinished deck Richard had promised to build and never started. The flames caught quickly. The wind shifted. Ash rose like exhausted memories. Maya didn't cry. She didn't speak. Later, as the last ember dimmed, she turned to Jerome. Why do you care this much? He didn't answer right away. Then, because I've watched too many good things rot because no one cared enough to stay. She met his eyes. What if I don't know how to move on from this? He stepped closer, voice steady. You don't move on. You grow around it. They stood quietly for a while, the night warm and full of ghostlight. The lemon tree behind them held firm, its leaves gleaming under the porch lamp. That same night, someone knocked on the door. A woman late 40s, tailored blazer, eyes sharp as brass tacks. She introduced herself as Kendra Shaw, estate lawyer. Maya blinked. I already signed probate papers years ago. Kendra gave a polite, unreadable smile. It's not about probate. It's about the secondary mortgage. I've been assigned to resolve the remaining claims on this property. There may be legal obstacles ahead. Maya stood frozen. Jerome appeared behind her, shirt damp from the evening heat. What kind of obstacles? He asked. Kendra paused. The co-signer has recently come forward. She may contest ownership. Lillian, Maya said quietly. Yes, Kendra confirmed. There's also a clause in the mortgage Richard signed about future ownership if the house is sold or defaulted. You'll want to consult someone about that. The porch suddenly felt small, tighter, the air heavier. Is she here? Maya asked. No, Kendra replied. But she's coming. When the lawyer left, Maya didn't go inside. She sat on the top step, arms wrapped around herself, jaw tight. Jerome sat beside her, close, but not touching. You don't have to face this alone, he said. Maya stared into the street. Funny, that's exactly how I feel. He didn't argue. He just sat there, as the night deepened, and the silence returned. But this time, it didn't feel so hollow. The next few days passed like a slow bruise. Maya didn't talk much. She went through the motions preparing Elijah's lunch, answering calls at the library, watering the lemon tree, but she moved as if her spirit had pulled back into itself. Jerome saw it in the way she left her tea half drunk, the way she folded laundry twice before putting it away. It was the kind of silence that doesn't want comfort. It wants answers. Then Florence got involved. Jerome had warned her weeks ago that Florence was a meddler, the kind of woman who wore pearls while gardening, and had a laminated list of HOA members she didn't trust. When she found out about the second mortgage and the mysterious woman named Lillian, she declared loudly, and with theatrical flair, "We are not letting this woman be bullied in her own damn home." 3 hours later, there were printed flyers on every mailbox on Maple Hollow Lane, inviting any concerned or nosy party to what she called a truth circle. Time, Saturday at 6 p.m. Place, Maya's backyard. Dress code, casual honesty. Maya wanted to cancel it. "This is insane," she said to Jerome. "What am I going to do, stand in my yard and ask my neighbors if they've been sneaking around with garden shears and mortgage paperwork?" "Yes," Florence said from the kitchen table, sipping lemon water. "With snacks." Jerome didn't protest. He just offered to bring folding chairs and make his famous peach cobbler, which no one had actually tasted but everyone assumed was excellent. Saturday came with dry skies and too much wind. By 5:45, the backyard was full of mismatched lawn furniture, citronella candles, and the kind of awkward small talk that only blooms when people pretend they're not here for drama. Florence wore a silk kimono and a Bluetooth speaker hanging from her neck, playing smooth jazz. Carla, Maya's yoga instructor neighbor with a whispery voice and opinions about everything, brought gluten-free brownies no one touched. Jerome arrived last, carrying the cobbler and a small potted bonsai tree. "For the center," he said, placing it in the middle of the circle. "Something to stare at when things get uncomfortable." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Symbolic much?" "Maybe. But it's hard to lie when there's something living between you." People trickled in. Some came out of curiosity, others with a hint of guilt wrapped in polite concern. There was old Mrs. Prentice with her binoculars tucked in her purse, Darren from house 212, who had a permanent scowl and the posture of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Even Elijah peeked through the screen door, fascinated by the gathering. Florence clapped twice. "Let's begin." The circle introduced themselves, some with real warmth, others with passive-aggressive smiles. Then Florence asked the question, "Does anyone know who left the letter, or who cut the lemon tree?" Silence. Jerome watched faces, the shuffle of shoes, the way Darren crossed his arms too fast, the nervous glance between Carla and a woman named Becca from the next block. Finally, Darren spoke. "All right, fine. I went into her yard." Everyone turned, "But not to cut anything," he added quickly. "Richard told me before he died that I could take a clipping from the tree for my horticulture blog. I'd been checking on it quietly for weeks, never touched it after it sprouted." Maya's voice was calm. "Why not just ask me?" He looked at the ground. "Didn't think you'd say yes. And honestly, I liked talking to Richard. We shared a lot more than most people knew." Florence leaned in. "Do you know Lillian Harris?" Darren looked up sharply. "The name sounds familiar. I think she was one of Richard's retreat friends. He used to mention her when they did that writer's workshop in Asheville." That caught Maya's attention. "Wait, Asheville?" He said that was a solo trip. "Not to me," Darren said. He said Lillian helped him rediscover his voice. "Thought you knew." Maya blinked, then laughed once, without joy. "Number I didn't." The circle sat in weighted silence. The bonsai in the middle seemed to grow heavier. Then Carla cleared her throat. "I didn't send the letters, Maya, but I knew someone did." Maya turned. "Who?" "My sister. She visits sometimes. She's old school, judgy. She saw Jerome over a few times and assumed things. I told her to leave it alone, but I didn't know she actually wrote something." Jerome folded his arms, but his voice stayed calm. "So she just, what? Took it upon herself to decide we were doing something wrong?" Carla flushed. "She believes things should look a certain way." Maya's voice was sharp now. "Well, they don't, and they never have." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time, it was clean, like the air after a thunderstorm. Eventually, people began standing, muttering goodbyes. Florence handed out Tupperware. Carla apologized again. Darren avoided eye contact. But Maya? She stood taller. After the last guest left, she and Jerome sat by the porch steps, the bonsai between them. "Well," she said, "that wasn't entirely useless." Jerome smiled faintly. "You okay?" No, she said, but I feel less alone in it. He nodded. That's a start. She reached over, touched the tiny leaves of the bonsai. This little guy's been through it tonight. Still standing, Jerome replied. Maya looked at him. Do you think people like us, people with scars and weird pasts and complicated families, do you think we actually get to start over? I don't think it's about starting over, he said. It's about building again, even if the ground's uneven. She nodded, then looked up at the night sky, soft and speckled with stars. I meant it, you know, she said after a while. That first question I asked you. I know. I wasn't proposing. I was just wondering if men like you still existed. Jerome didn't smile. He just answered honestly. They do. You just have to stop looking for them in the wrong seasons. She exhaled. Well, here's to the weird, stubborn ones who plant lemon trees anyway. And beside them, the bonsai swayed slightly in the breeze, a silent witness to a small act of truth in a backyard that had seen too much silence and not enough justice. 2 days after the truth circle, the world seemed to exhale around Maya's home. The air was lighter, less dense with suspicion. Jerome showed up at 8 a.m., sharp, toolbox in hand, same as always, as if no emotional storm had passed, as if they hadn't shared truths under citronella candles. That was how he operated, not with grand gestures, but with consistency. He fixed the front gate without being asked, replaced the crooked post, reinforced the latch, all while Maya sat on the porch swing, watching him in silence, sipping lukewarm coffee from a mug that said, World's okayest librarian. You're quiet today, Jerome said, not looking up from the hinges. I'm processing, he grunted. That sounds like something a lawyer says when they're losing a case. She smiled, barely. You always joke like this when you're nervous? Jerome paused, turned the wrench slowly. Only when I care how the verdict goes. That made her look up, but before she could speak, Elijah's voice rang out from inside. Mama, there's a man at the door. Maya stood, heart jolting. Jerome set the wrench down carefully and followed her toward the front porch. The man waiting outside was tall, wiry, with salt and pepper hair and an expensive suit that didn't fit him right, like he'd borrowed it for the occasion. He carried a leather folder and wore sunglasses, even though the sun was still behind the pines. Maya Williams? He asked. Yes. I'm Harold Bishop. I represent the estate of Richard Holliday. Jerome took a quiet step closer, his posture subtly protective. Maya nodded slowly, her voice cautious. What do you want? The man removed his glasses. His eyes were bloodshot, but sharp. I've come to deliver a revised version of the will. Richard filed it a few months before his passing. It appears someone attempted to suppress it. Maya blinked. Suppress it? Harold opened the folder, handed her a page. You were named the primary beneficiary. Not Lillian Harris, not the trust. You. Her fingers trembled. Jerome reached out, steadying her hand with his own. She didn't let go. I don't understand, Maya said. Harold sighed. It's messy. Richard was pressured, it seems. His previous attorney, Lillian's cousin, filed an earlier draft as final, but a clerk flagged inconsistencies. When we compared handwriting and timestamps, it was clear this was the last valid version. She stared at the document, lips parting slightly. Why didn't anyone tell me sooner? Because they didn't want you to know. Maya's breath caught. She didn't cry, but the air shifted around her like grief had briefly visited again. Harold continued. There will be a formal hearing in 2 weeks, but I'd advise you to retain legal counsel. I can recommend someone. I have someone, Jerome said, quietly but firmly. Harold looked at him, and for a second, some old habit of underestimation flickered in his expression. But he read the silence correctly and backed off. Very well, I'll leave this with you. He handed Maya the rest of the file and turned to leave. But just before he reached the steps, he paused. For what it's worth, he said, I think Richard knew what he was doing. He didn't flinch when he signed it. Then he walked away. Inside, Maya stood by the kitchen table, reading the will again. Jerome leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching her carefully. Are you all right? I don't know yet, she said honestly. He nodded. That's fair. She glanced up. You always do that? Do what? Let me have space to not know. He shrugged. You don't build fences by hammering faster. You build them by checking every post twice. She smiled weakly. You and your metaphors. They work. She turned back to the document. You think this changes anything? It confirms what you already suspected, that you weren't crazy, that someone tried to erase you. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, he said. But it should make you feel right. Later that evening, Maya sat with Elijah on the couch, the boy curled up next to her, unaware of the war quietly unfolding around their lives. She brushed his curls from his forehead, heart aching with the kind of fear only mothers know, the fear of being unprepared when everything finally comes for you. Outside, Jerome was still in the yard, tidying up the last of the fence work. Maya walked out, barefoot, arms crossed against the evening chill. He looked up. Thought you'd turned in. I couldn't sleep. He wiped his hands on a rag. Want some company? She didn't answer, just walked closer and stood beside him in the grass, silence stretching between them. Then she spoke. You know what I hate most? What? That I still hear his voice in my head. Richard's telling me to stay out of things, to be patient. That legal stuff is complicated. I was quiet for so long, Jerome, and now I don't even know who that silence belonged to, or him. Jerome looked at her, face unreadable. Then he said, silence can be a cage, or a weapon. Depends on who's holding the key. She met his eyes. And you? What do you hold? Hope, he said simply. Hope that people like you stop questioning whether they deserve the truth. She inhaled, slowly, then did something unexpected. She stepped forward and placed her hand flat on his chest, right above his heart. It's loud in there, she said. He placed his hand gently over hers. Only when you're around. And in the quiet that followed, no one moved to fill it with jokes or distractions. They just stood there, two souls who had nothing left to explain, and everything still to risk. Above them, the wind stirred the lemon tree again, the same tree someone once tried to destroy. It stood, crooked but alive, bearing witness, just like them. Do you think he regretted it? She asked. Jerome didn't rush to answer. He stared out the window for a moment before saying, I think he knew he had to do something. Doesn't mean he stopped being who he was. She nodded slowly. It's like the guilt came too late. Maybe, Jerome said. But sometimes, late is better than never, especially if it leaves a trail someone else can follow. She glanced up at him, catching the way the sunlight cut across his jawline. You always speak like that? He smirked. Only when I'm trying to sound wiser than I feel. They shared a small laugh, the kind that came not from joy but from mutual weariness. Later that afternoon, Jerome suggested they take a walk. To where? Maya asked. Nowhere. That's the point. So they walked past the edge of her property, past the hollowed-out remains of the old barn that burned down 2 summers ago, into the narrow trail where honeysuckle climbed low fences. They walked in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because some truths settle better in motion. I used to walk here with Elijah when he was a baby, Maya said. He thought every bird call was a message. Jerome smiled. Maybe he was right. Then she stopped. Up ahead, parked just off the dirt road, was a black SUV, unmarked, windows tinted dark. Do you see that? She whispered. Jerome's body shifted slightly, stepping ahead of her, like a human shield. Stay behind me. He approached the car slowly. Just as he reached it, the driver's window rolled down, revealing a woman in her 60s with sharp cheekbones and a pearl necklace. Jerome Carter, she said, voice dry as bone. Still playing bodyguard? He narrowed his eyes. Lillian. Lillian Harris stepped out of the car, brushing imaginary dust off her skirt. I came to offer Maya a deal. She doesn't want your deal. I haven't even said it yet. She doesn't have to hear it. Lillian turned her attention to Maya, who stood frozen a few feet behind. You're a smart woman. A quiet life is still an option. If you walk away from the hearing, we'll offer you a cash settlement, enough to start fresh, away from this town, away from the mess. You can raise your boy in peace. Maya's jaw clenched. You mean, walk away from the truth? I mean, walk away from pain. I've already lived through the pain, Maya replied, voice steady. What I want now is justice. And Lillian's expression didn't shift. Justice is messy. It doesn't care about your rent or your reputation. You'll lose more than you gain. Jerome stepped forward. Get back in your car. Lillian looked at him with something between pity and contempt, still acting like a soldier. But this isn't a war, Jerome. It's business. Then you've never seen what war really looks like, he said quietly. Without another word, she got in the SUV and drove off, dust curling in the air behind her like a warning. That night, Maya sat on her porch long after Elijah had gone to sleep. Jerome was by her side, a blanket over both their legs. She's scared, Maya said. She should be. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? Jerome didn't answer at first. He looked out into the dark yard, past the garden, past the road. Then he said, sometimes the right thing isn't about winning. It's about not letting the wrong thing go unanswered. She leaned her head on his shoulder. That sounds lonely. It is, but you're not alone. The next day, Maya received an envelope by courier. No return address. Inside was a single photograph of her and Jerome sitting on the porch together, arms nearly touching. On the back, scrawled in thin handwriting, was one sentence: "You're making it worse for yourself." Her hands trembled. Jerome read it and immediately said, "We're reporting this." She shook her head. "Number. If they want me to be afraid, they don't get to see me flinch. You don't have to prove you're strong every second, Maya." She met his eyes. "I'm not proving it. I'm surviving it." He nodded slowly, then added, "I'll be with you in court. You won't walk in alone." She smiled. It was small, tired, but real. "You really think we'll win?" "No," he said. "I think the truth will win, whether they like it or not." And in that moment, beneath the gathering weight of what was coming, Maya realized that sometimes strength doesn't roar, it just shows up, again and again, and refuses to leave your side. The courthouse in Franklin County wasn't built for drama. Beige walls, flickering fluorescent lights, a waiting bench with one leg shorter than the other sit, was the kind of place where forgotten traffic tickets and silent divorces went to die. But on that morning, it felt like a coliseum, and Maya Williams was walking into the arena. She wore a navy blue dress, elegant but unpretentious. Her hair pulled back, face calm but unreadable. She carried no purse, no phone, just a folder with Richard's second will inside, worn soft from the number of times her hands had clutched it in the past week. Jerome waited outside the courtroom doors, hands in the pockets of his pressed slacks. When Maya walked up, he offered no speech, no pep talk, just a silent nod. It was all she needed. Inside, the courtroom was already filling with the expected and the unwelcome. On one side sat Richard's family, his brother Thomas in an ill-fitting blazer, arms crossed like a man waiting to be insulted. Next to him, Lillian Harris, poised as ever, her pearl necklace practically glowing under the lights. 2 rows behind them sat a few locals, drawn by gossip, some whispering already. When Maya stepped inside, a hush fell. She felt the stare, some pitying, others judgmental, most uncertain. She walked past them all with quiet dignity, taking a seat near the front beside her public interest attorney, Marcus Devlin, a man who wore scuffed shoes and a look that said he knew he was outgunned and didn't care. The judge, a white-haired man named Bernard Wexler, entered promptly. His robe was a little crooked on one side, but his gaze was razor-sharp. "We are here to determine the validity of the revised last will and testament of Mr. Richard Hayes." As opening arguments began, Maya watched Lillian lean into Thomas, whispering something. He gave a smug nod. Lillian's attorney, Robert Fielding, began with confidence. "Your Honor, what we have here is a forgery, a poorly disguised one. My clients, the rightful heirs, contend that the will Miss Williams is presenting is fabricated, a desperate act by a woman who was never more than a temporary fixture in Mr. Hayes's final months." Maya didn't flinch, but her hand gripped the edge of the bench. Devlin stood slowly. "We have testimony from Richard's notary, a voice memo from Richard himself dated 2 weeks before his death, and handwriting analysis from a certified expert. But most importantly, we have motive not from my client, but from those who've spent years hiding Richard's guilt." Whispers broke out in the room. The judge banged his gavel. Throughout the morning, witnesses took the stand. The notary confirmed the signature. The handwriting expert held up charts, comparing loops and strokes. But the turning point came when Devlin pulled out the voice memo. Richard's voice filled the courtroom, tired, raspy, but clear. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I know what I've done can't be erased. But Maya deserves something. A home, a future. Something good to come from the worst of me. Lillian visibly stiffened. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. It wasn't just proof. It was Richard's voice saying, out loud, what no one else had dared to believe. When court recessed for lunch, Maya stepped outside into the courtyard to breathe. Jerome found her by the steps. You're holding up, he said. I'm barely holding on, she replied. He looked at her a long moment. Then let me hold the rest. She didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. Back inside, it was time for Maya to take the stand. Devlin's questions were straightforward. How she met Richard, how their conversations turned from transactional to emotional, how he slowly began to speak of regrets. Then came Fielding. So, Miss Williams, are we to believe that a man like Richard Hayes, with decades of family legacy, would suddenly decide to leave everything to a woman he barely knew? I didn't ask him to, Maya said evenly. He offered. Because you reminded him of his guilt? No, she said. Because I listened. And because he saw my son sleeping on a fold-out couch one night and said, that boy deserves better. Fielding paced. You never considered that he was vulnerable, confused, that maybe he wasn't of sound mind? She leaned forward slightly. He was more clear-headed than anyone else in that house. Gasps. The judge raised his hand for silence. Fielding smirked. Isn't it convenient that there are no other witnesses? Maya looked up. There is one. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened and in walked a man no one expected. It was Reverend Thomas Clayton, Richard's childhood pastor. He was over 70, with a cane and a voice like weathered oak. I wasn't on the witness list, he said, addressing the judge. But I have something to say. The judge allowed it. Reverend Clayton took the stand and looked directly at Lillian. 2 months before Richard passed, he came to me, confessed that the inheritance he planned was wrong, said the only person who'd ever really seen him not as a businessman or as a brother but as a broken man was Maya. Silence. I counseled him to make it right. I witnessed him seal the envelope with the new will. I blessed it. Lillian's mouth tightened, her fingers curled inward. When the final statements were read, Judge Wexler took his time. Then finally, the court recognizes the revised will as valid. Maya Williams is the sole legal heir to the estate of Richard Hayes. Maya closed her eyes, not out of triumph, but exhaustion. Later that evening, back at home, Elijah ran into her arms as she stepped through the door. He didn't understand court rulings, but he understood his mother's face, and that tonight it was safe to smile. Jerome sat on the porch, watching the sun dip low. Maya joined him, sliding into the chair beside him. You stayed, she said quietly. I told you I would. She was silent a long while. Then turning toward him, she asked, So, would you marry someone like me? He looked at her, this woman who had been underestimated, cornered, but never broken, and said, Only if she made lemonade like you. She laughed, soft and free, her hand brushing against his, and in the fading light of justice finally done, the fence that once separated them stood quietly in the background whole again.